Welcome to today's leadership short on compassion fatigue. This is about the helpers, anyone who provides a service or who listens or who cares for other people or for animals or for the environment itself. So you could be a nurse, a doctor, you could work in a care home, you could work in a veterinary surgery or an animal shelter. You might be an unpaid friend who answers calls in the middle of the night to a friend who is suffering with anxiety or going through a series of traumatic breakups. Or you could be caring for a family member who is struggling through an illness for a long time. You could be a teacher, you could be a doctor or a nurse, you could be a counsellor or a therapist. Compassion fatigue can affect all of these people. Your caring, your empathy, the very things that help you get and understand them comes at a cost. We become exposed, or we're exposed to the suffering and the hardship of other people or of other animals or friends or family members, and that can have a cumulative toll on us, on our teams, on our work, on our home. Compassion fatigue can also be hard to gauge because it's slow moving and then it hits, and many of us are exposed to us and it creeps up on us and we get a bit less hopeful, a bit more numb or angry. Maybe we feel a bit more isolated. Sometimes we're running on empty and we have little caring left to give. Compassion fatigue is about caring and exhaustion. Are you sure that all of this caring hasn't gotten to you? And that's what today is about. My name's Stephen Lambe. I'm a business psychologist of about 30 years. I'm going to cover three things today. Number one, what is compassion fatigue? Number two, what are the warning signs? And number three, what can I do about it to help myself and to help others? You get compassion fatigue because you care or because you used to care. It's characterised by a profound emotional and physical exhaustion that takes place when helpers are unable to refuel and regenerate. Unrelenting caseloads, daily exposure to the trauma that other people have suffered, working long hours, office politics, the fear that they can never do enough, and there's so much to do. Getting to know your clients' stories and sometimes taking home those stories. No breaks, wanting to be the perfect carer, the perfect daughter, the perfect father, the perfect advocate. And over time, it's a gradual and then sudden erosion of their empathy, of their hope, of their compassion for others, and often for their compassion for themselves. It's often described as a negative cost of caring. A deep erosion of our compassion, of our ability to tolerate strong emotions and difficult stories in others. You might even be saying the right things, but in the back of your head, I could be saying, I've heard worse. We've taken on the pain and suffering of others and made it our own. Compassion fatigue is caused by empathy. And if you ignore your own care, it can break you. Rachel Remen said, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. Compassion fatigue is a natural response. You will get wet. The longer that someone provides care for a partner, for a parent, for a sibling or some other loved one, the more likely they are to experience negative effects. Due to busyness and shame, many struggle in silence, which compounds the problem, makes it even worse. All caregivers, whether professional or not, need to know their limits so that they can ask for and get help. We need to listen to our emotions. We need to check our inner compass to make sure that our well-being is still on track. We need to be able to recognise it so that we can do something about it. There are many signs and symptoms for compassion fatigue, and to a large extent they're fairly similar to those that we see for stress and for burnout. The big three sets of signs are physical, behavioural and emotional. And for physical, we could be looking at things like exhaustion, headaches, anything to do with hypochondria is often a big one there, or somatization. Somatization is essentially where we have things like tension, headaches, or I get back pain, but I'm getting the back pain because it's a physical manifestation of the stress that I'm going through. Behavioural signs could be I'm self-medicating more, I'm drinking more, anger or avoidance of issues, absenteeism, I'm not coming into work, or I'm finding it more difficult to make decisions, or I notice that I'm crying. strange moments, overeating. That would be a big one for me. Anytime if I find myself reaching for too much ice cream and pizza. Irritability or forgetfulness. I'm not thinking as clearly as I could or I used to. And emotional signs and symptoms, that could be depression, or I'm finding it more difficult to empathise, or I'm becoming increasingly cynical or feeling resentful either for the clients or for the people who I'm working with, or I'm dreading working with certain clients, or I'm beginning to feel professionally isolated, or my view of the world is starting to get shifted. Now we also have spiritual and relationship challenges. So the spiritual ones could be anything from, why am I in this line of work? I'm really starting to question it. Or relationships, I'm becoming overprotective or hyper vigilant, or I'm starting to feel a lack of concern, or I'm not feeling sufficient concern. Let's say things are going on in my family, but I'm kind of thinking, hang on, if you see what I'm dealing with at work, this is low level, when actually they need me to be a caring father. And then we have some of the issues that happen at work in terms of signs and symptoms. Maybe I'm feeling more and more dissatisfied with my job, or feelings of hopelessness in relation to the job, or I'm not thinking that things are fair, or I'm feeling overwhelmed by the obligations that I'm trying to do or trying to fill, or I'm feeling a sense of frustration. So there are many, many signs. Developing a system to recognise and track the warning signs that I might be developing compassion fatigue could be incredibly helpful. Paying attention to my body and understanding my symptoms might help me to make decisions to do what's necessary to take care of myself before things get too serious. Now, people who work in nuclear reactors or who work with radiation wear a small device called a dosimeter, and a dosimeter lets a person know what their exposure to radiation is. And I suppose if it starts showing red, you're in deep trouble. If it starts showing yellow, it's time to take some care and maybe get out. And if it's green, all things are fine. It tracks their exposure. So here's our version. The green, yellow, red gauge that you see in the slides, or wellness dosimeter, is a visual to help you in developing your own personal early warning system. Take a minute to think about how you feel when your stress levels are in the green zone. How are you feeling? Where's your energy levels? What's you thinking? How are your emotions? How about the yellow zone? What's going on when you're in there? Physically, mentally, emotionally. And what about the red zone? How do you know when you're completely overloaded? Francoise Mathieu, a psychotherapist and author of the Compassion Fatigue Workbook, developed this idea of the wellness dosimeter and suggests that by becoming familiar with the signs and symptoms listed in the checklist provided in the handouts for you, you'll be able to begin to understand your own physical and psychological and emotional reactions to the work that you do as a caring professional. If we consider this or link this into my own life, my wife, who is a frontline medical doctor, and when she's in the yellow, things are starting to get a bit tough for her. She has stress dreams or headaches. She doesn't sleep as well. She stops doing her running. That's often a key sign. She starts to feel grumpy at everybody. I've never seen her in the red. Me, when I'm in the yellow or moving towards red, I get a cold sore. I get neck pain. I go into avoidance, or I head into and stay in my office and isolate myself from people, or I try to hide there. I feel argumentative and persecuted at the same time. And that's often a sign for me that I am in the yellow, and maybe it's time for some self-care. So imagine your own wellness dosimeter. What would it look like for you, and where would you currently be on it? What would be a symbolic way for you to regularly take stock and check in with yourself? So you could look at yourself, where am I today? Green, yellow or red? Where have I been over the last week or the last month? So you could do a 1 or a 2 minute check-in. How am I doing today process? Or you could use this as a journaling process or as a check-in process at work with your team. Everybody finding out, so where are we at today individually and as a team? And this could be a really great way of just letting us know where we are and where other people are. And it's a great start. So here are some of my top tips for looking after ourselves and each other. There are some more tips in the handouts, as well as some tips for those of us who lead teams. The first tip: maintain balance. Maintain balance in your life, in your work, in your play. Make sure there's some balance between the roles that we spend, and be it as a worker, a friend, a husband, a brother, a dad. But make sure that we have some balance in those roles. Practice self-care. Make sure you eat as well as you can, as nutritiously as you can. Get some exercise if at all possible. Seek to get at least 8 hours of sleep, a restful, nourishing sleep a night. Read a book. Take a short walk. Call a nourishing friend and get rid of some of the toxic ones. Watch a funny movie. Whatever it is that fills your tank or fuels your tank. Even 10 minutes a day hugely helps. And take your holidays. Take your days off. Make sure to put your own oxygen mask on first. When you look after yourself, you also have enough energy and mental resources left to then look after others really beautifully. Set and maintain boundaries. Caregivers often feel compelled to do more and give more due to a sense of obligation or guilt or good intent. And that can sometimes end up unhealthy. And by boundaries, I'm talking about, let's say, time boundaries. So you might agree to, I'll spend 15 minutes on this and no more. Or emotional boundaries, particularly with clients. Yes, it's incredibly important to step into their shoes and walk a mile in their shoes. But we also need to remember that it's their shoes and that we hand those shoes back at the end of a session. The key is to stay compassionately connected with whoever it is that we're caring for, whilst not taking over their pain or becoming too invested or uncaring. Reduce work stress. And that could be anything from saying no to varying your work, seeking help, delegating where possible. Take mini breaks throughout and during the day. Acknowledge your successes. Use support services or online counselling if that's available to you. Certainly use your supervision. Get organised. Use your diary more effectively. There are 1,000 small things that we can do to reduce our work stress. And learn to value being a good enough practitioner. Can you really perform at 100% of the time? I think we need to avoid maladaptive perfectionism so that our talent, our conscientiousness, our energy can be directed in the right way and can be maintained over time so that your job doesn't become or stay impossible. Unwatched, the life of a helper can have no or few boundaries, and there will always be more to do. Maybe it's better to adopt the style of a veteran athlete who knows when to jog and knows when to sprint. What can you do to be good enough and not perfect? And finally, have a shutdown routine. I know some people who the last 30 minutes of every day is diarised in their calendar. They spend 20 minutes doing quick emails and completing some quick jobs. Then they check their calendar and their to-do list for the next day. One person I know then spends another couple of minutes. They take 5 calming breaths and they ask themselves the question, how do I want to now show up at home for my family? And that helps guide their brain and put them into the mindset of the transition between work and home. And that can be such a useful thing to do. And interestingly, they did that when they were at work in the office. They now do it in their spare room just before they come downstairs. We've covered a lot in the last 15 minutes around compassion fatigue, from what it is and why it matters, to some ideas around what we can do to better manage ourselves and stay safe. Dr. Les Greenberg, who is a couples counsellor, says that when working with couples, dig where the ground is soft. Instead of picking your trickiest area, pick an area that you can easily or most easily imagine improving on. So you can make a commitment to go for a walk every lunchtime, a short walk, as opposed to, say, find a way to make my boss, horrible boss, become a beautiful, lovely human being. You may not notice right away, but making one small change to a daily routine can have huge long-term effects. So I suppose I'd like to finish with, what commitments can you make to yourself? What one commitment can you make to yourself? What can we do to work together as a team? I hope this has been of interest and of use to you, and hopefully I'll see you again one day. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Bye-bye.